In the future in the city of New London, society strictly follows three rules: no privacy, no family, and no monogamy. Their lives may be hedonistic, but each citizen still has their proper place and is given a job according to their rank from alpha to epsilon. They don't give birth naturally anymore. Instead, surgically removed ovaries are fertilized and incubated at the hatchery and conditioning center. In this place, the babies already receive their rank and the teachings that will keep them happy in their future jobs. Every citizen must also take a daily medicine called soma that helps them with their moods and wear optics on their eyes that record everything they do. Outside the city, the area is known as the Savage Lands and every person from there is considered barbaric, yet a company offers trips to these lands as if it was a rustic attraction. Lenina is a beta plus who works the hatchery. One day she's called to his boss's office, an alpha plus called Bernard. He plays a bunch of security footage that shows her getting naughty with an alpha plus named Henry. Bernard doesn't reprimand her for the impulses themselves, but he points out that they've done it so many times that it's bordering on exclusivity. This is seen as selfish because everyone belongs to everyone, so Bernard scolds Lenina for her behavior and reminds her to share. Meanwhile, Bernard keeps watching Lenina's footage only to be interrupted by an important report. Bernard rushes to a leisure center and gives a shocked epsilon called Jack 60 some soma to distract him from the incident. Another guy with the same face is dead on the ground and Jack 60 says he fell. To get rid of the curious crowd, Bernard gives them a bunch of soma, then he goes upstairs to test the height with an orange. The railing is high so the guy couldn't have fallen, but jumping doesn't make sense either. Bernard touches the dead man's forehead and the memory of the incident confirms he jumped, which leaves Bernard truly disturbed. Afterward, Bernard returns to his office to discuss this with Wilhelmina, his emotional engineer Helm. This is this world's equivalent of a therapist. Wilhelmina doesn't understand how someone could jump by choice and reminds Bernard that epsilons don't truly feel. Then she sends him to have fun at the pleasure garden. That's where Lenina and some friends are headed too, but sadly she has to turn down Henry and choose another partner for the night to avoid more trouble. When Bernard arrives, he turns down all the offers from potential lovers, choosing to watch Lenina instead. When she sees him too, he panics and runs away. Afterward, everyone on the dance floor begins doing the dirty together. In the Savage Lands, the locals do their best to live on the scraps they're given. John works as a janitor and fixer-upper at the theme park, where the other actors often treat him like dirty and demand better service. One of John's chores includes taking care of the guns that are supposed to be props for the park's games. At home things aren't any better because his mother Linda is an alcoholic and the town is constantly affected by intermittent power cuts. One evening, John hears a noise outside and sees someone moving in the shadows. He grabs a knife and goes to investigate, only to suddenly be surrounded by a group of locals that kidnap him. They take him out of town to look at New London's skyline, explaining they need to take back what's theirs as they reveal a box full of bullets. Afterward, John's coworker Madison drives him home and gives him a bullet, saying the group is just giving him a chance. In New London, Jack 60 takes out a hidden object he took from the incident and cries, which nobody ever does in this world. At the same time, Bernard goes home and takes off the eye optic. At that moment he gets a call, so he quickly puts it back on, causing the director of stability to scold him for seeking privacy. He's also scolded for the orange experiment and for not having done the naughty for a while, so he's given a ticket to visit the Savage Lands as a forced vacation. Moments later, Lenina visits him and Bernard admits doing the naughty never felt right for him. They watch some dirty footage together, trying to make sense of the world. Meanwhile, World Controller Mustafa is reviewing the footage of the incident from many citizens' eyes and notices Jack 60 touched the body, so she goes looking for him. All the epsilons are standing in line, but when Mustafa mentions a possible virus, she notices a hand twitching and knows she's found Jack 60. She dismisses everyone else and interrogates Jack 60 until he admits he started to feel after he touched the dead guy, calling him his friend. He also shares that Bernard touched the body too. Sometime later, Lenina meets Bernard because she'll be going on the vacation with him. She's never been on a spaceship before and she holds Bernard's hand in fear as the ship enters space. The initial shake is over soon and Lenina becomes fascinated by zero gravity as she floats around. Eventually they make it to a hotel in the Savage Lands, where they're given a guidebook full of propaganda about the old world. The rooms lack technology to match the feeling of the past, but in the garden, all the tourists are still going at it. Lenina and Bernard get inspired and start kissing, but before they can get down to business, Lenina wonders if here they can be different from everyone else. The couple pulls apart in fear as they realize they're becoming savages. The next day, Bernard and Lenina head out on a bus tour. The guide points at the actors that pretend to be in an old-style family and explains how nasty pregnancy is. Inside a theater, they watch a group of actors reenact Black Friday to prove how violent savages are. Next they stop at a fake church, where Lenina is amazed by the feeling of grass on her feet and the dead animal she finds on the ground. John is nearby cleaning and can't stop watching her, feeling awkward when she waves at him. Then the actors reenact her wedding for the tourists, filling it with jealousy and objections. As the script says, they take out their guns and pretend to gunfight, only to discover they aren't props anymore. It turns out half of the actors are rebels and soon more members of their group arrive to open fire on the tourists, killing most of the crowd. Bernard and Lenina immediately run away, although Bernard is feeling dizzy because he was wounded during the fight. Lenina gives him some soma and drags him away as they avoid incoming rebel cars. At the fake church, John pukes at the sight of so much death. A rebel gives him a knife and asks him to join them while the group goes out to find the tourists that escaped. In the evening, Bernard and Lenina manage to hide inside an old building, where Bernard passes out. At that moment they're found by John, who jumps on Lenina and covers her mouth. Moments later Bernard wakes up to discover he and Lenina are in John's house. He wants to protect them, so he and Linda work on removing the bullet from Bernard's wound. At that moment Madison arrives, so John tries to distract her while the others hide. While Lenina keeps feeding Bernard soma until she runs out, Madison reveals she knows John is hiding the tourists. John keeps on denying it, but when Madison hears a noise, she takes out her gun to threaten him. Before she can fire, Linda stabs her to death. Then she sends John to take out the tourists while she secretly takes soma too. The group leaves the house and Linda convinces their neighbor Pope to take them in. They give Bernard some alcohol for the pain while John watches through the window how the rebels arrive to search his house. Then Pope heats up a spoon and uses it to cauterize Bernard's wound. At the same time, Linda takes Lenina to the bathroom to wash the blood off and admits she used to be a beta plus. She ran away from the city with an alpha, who eventually abandoned her. John continues to watch through the window and notices the rebels found Madison's body, so they're leaving. At that moment Pope's wife arrives, thus Pope goes out to distract her while the group escapes through the back door. As they escape on Pope's truck, they hear the rebels shooting him and his wife. Soon a rebel starts chasing them on a bike and opens fire, but John just runs over their attacker with the truck. As the group drives away, they see the theme park burning in the distance. Eventually they make it to the barrier around the Savage Lands, where tons of people are trying to escape. John panics and runs away, so Linda goes after him and confesses she and his dad come from New London, trying to convince him to go to the city because life is better there. Meanwhile Bernard is tired of waiting and tries driving the truck but barely makes it move. At that moment Linda and John arrive and take Bernard and Lenina out of the truck because the rebels are shooting any person trying to escape. As the group escapes through the forest, Linda shares her last soma with Bernard. Lenina starts crying and is shocked to feel these emotions. Suddenly they hear a shot nearby and see rebels approaching. The group runs as fast as possible and make it to the special barrier, which Bernard and Lenina cross without issues. John freezes so Linda pushes him to cross as well as the rebels open fire. The barrier doesn't stop either of them, confirming Linda's story. Then the group runs away while the rebels remind them they're free people and that's their land. Soon the group is flying away in the spaceship and John sees droplets of blood float in the air, revealing Linda was shot during their escape. He cries for her as she dies in her seat. Sometime later, Bernard is fully healed and advises Lenina to go back to normal life, talking as if nothing happened. Meanwhile John is being kept in a locked room, where he's breaking things and demanding to see his mother. Mustafa watches him with fascination and agrees to let him out. He's taken to see his mother while Mustafa decides he'll be allowed to stay, disregarding the worries from the director. Soon John is given new clothes and Bernard shows him around the city. John refuses to take soma and is scared of technologies he isn't familiar with. He shows a video about how New London works, but he finds it boring. A worker comes by to take the measures from his eyes and discovers John is an alpha exotic, meaning his genes are part of the 1%. While Bernard is distracted by seeing Henry, the worker tries to put an optic in John's eyes, only for John to push him away and run. As John walks through the streets, everyone stares at him and judges him for being a savage. To go unnoticed, he follows a bunch of Epsilon workers and finds their mess hall. Jack 60 invites him to sit with them and shares his food. At work, Lenina struggles to focus and lets an embryo pass without giving it a rank, which triggers an alarm. Frustrated, she rushes out and goes to talk to Bernard. She confesses she's changed and wants Bernard to admit neither of them were actually happy before the trip, but he just thinks she's talking nonsense. In the meantime, the director finds John on the security footage and removes his optic before going to see him. He sends all the Epsilons away before telling John he can help him to go back to the Savage Lands, where he really belongs. They leave the city and get to a cliff, which allows John to see the ocean for the first time. The director has arranged a spaceship for John to escape and the way he talks about the situation makes John realizes this guy is his father. An argument immediately ensues that escalates into a fight. In the struggle, John accidentally pushes the director and causes him to fall off the cliff. Terrified, John runs back to the city and lies low. Back to Bernard, he goes to the director's office and finds the abandoned optic, which he compares to John's. He notices they're exactly identical and rushes to show Henry, who suspiciously dismisses everything he has to say. At the same time, John tries hiding inside a building, only to discover it's a naughty nightclub. He climbs a decoration to escape from the people who want to drag him into their pleasure. This makes John appear on security footage again, so Bernard rushes to the club too, helping John escape safely. At home, Lenina goes through John's belongings and finds his music player. She listens to old music with actual lyrics for the first time and is overwhelmed with emotion. Desperate for release, she heads to Henry's apartment and they get dirty together. Moments later, John says goodbye to his mother before she gets cremated. Mustafa informs Bernard he's being tested and he needs to induct John into the society. She also tells him the director died, calling it just a fall. After she leaves, Bernard gives John some soma and he finally takes it. In contrast, Jack 60 refuses to take his daily dose and approaches the window to draw a sad face. At the same time, Mustafa rises from a pool after having a vision of a city in ruins, a mysterious glow appearing on her face. The next day Lenina and Henry get dirty again in his office. Henry notices Lenina is behaving different and she wonders if he likes it as she tries to take away his soma, but he quickly takes it back. He shares it with her and Lenina grabs it, but on her way out she throws it away. Meanwhile Bernard goes to Mustafa's office and is shocked to see she has art there, although he doesn't understand it. He tells Mustafa that the dead director was John's father, yet she isn't surprised. Instead she asks Bernard to keep the secret. Speaking of John, he's being kept at the stability center so he can be taught with the kids, but he's barely paying attention. Bernard arrives to try to convince him to put on an optic, but John refuses and shows he can tell which rank each person watching him is. Lenina is in this crowd and she can't take seeing John like this, so she runs outside. She almost takes some soma but stops herself just in time. Afterward Lenina goes to play tennis with her best friend Franny, who can't understand Lenina's moods lately. Lenina starts playing more aggressively and absolutely destroys Franny, helping her feel anger and frustration. After the match Lenina goes home and ends up having a breakdown, so she takes soma again. Meanwhile Bernard goes to see Wilhelmina and leaves John in a room with a bunch of people who were banished and won't stop taking soma. John makes them uncomfortable by discussing the idea of not following the ranks they were assigned. One of the guys complains, but before things escalate, Bernard brings Wilhelmina, who immediately becomes fascinated by John. She wants to do the dirty with him, so Bernard has to remind her to take it slow. In the evening, John gets fancy clothes from a Gamma servant named Gary so Bernard can take him to a party. John sees Lenina and tries to approach her, only to be dragged away by Wilhelmina. The other partygoers are curious about John and Bernard becomes popular when he shares stories. In private, Wilhelmina explains to John that an AI known as Indra was constructed to oversee the fortunes of all citizens and produce a utopia where happiness is permanent and there's no ill feelings. In return John shares a story from the Savage Lands and ends up getting dirty with Wilhelmina. Jack 60 is also at the party as part of the cleanup team. He wonders why Epsilons aren't allowed to join the crowd as his hands start moving to the music. Moments later Henry arrives and bumps into John as he leaves Wilhelmina's room. Bernard is shocked to hear Henry introduce himself as the new director, then he watches him get on the dance floor to start kissing Lenina. Feeling humiliated, Bernard tries to leave, but John convinces he must stand up for himself and teaches him how to punch someone. Bernard goes back and punches Henry in the face, leaving everyone in shock. John raises Bernard's hand in victory and the crowd surrounds him, convincing him to get dirty with him. After seeing the punch, Jack 60 closes his fist as he realizes he's learned something important. Bernard goes looking for Lenina, finding her looking at a hologram of Earth. They share a sweet moment as they hold hands and remind each other they can't be a couple because of the rules. Their moment is interrupted by an ad appearing on the hologram announcing a new shift in the party. Lenina goes back and is shocked to see John having fun with the naughtiness as if he wasn't a savage anymore. A few days later, the punch has become the latest trend. It appears on ads and people wear makeup simulating black eyes. John becomes incredibly popular and everyone asks for stories from the Savage Lands. He goes to dozens of parties, sharing the same stories over and over again and ending each night with new partners on his bed. Meanwhile Mustafa loses a game of Go against Indra, which causes her to have a breakdown. Then she takes a secret tunnel and opens a door with her fingerprint, revealing the beach. There she finds Elliot, the man all the Epsilon workers are cloned from. She tells him about John, calling him a virus that has infected the city. Their conversation reveals the two of them were part of a team of 10 who went to sleep after creating Indra, letting her work on creating a new world. Mustafa insists something is wrong with Indra and the city, but Elliot thinks Mustafa is just scared because she'll die soon. Suddenly the hologram disappears and shows Mustafa didn't go to the beach. She went to the basement room where the 10 bodies still sleep. To her shock, a bed is empty. She runs back into the tunnel and Indra appears before her, making her fall. Indra says Mustafa isn't playing by the rules, then she fills the tunnel with water. Eventually John gets tired of the same routine and decides to take the night off. He rides the train only to realize it goes on a circle instead of reaching a destination. When he gets off he bumps into Lenina, who is frustrated because he can fit in so easily while she's struggling. She tries to take some soma, but John stops her and tells her to focus on the vibrations beneath them. Then John convinces her to take the Epsilon train, which is off limits and nobody knows where it goes. Lenina takes off her optic and John holds her hand while they watch the landscape. They eventually make it to a beautiful garden and Lenina cries as she realizes all the things she's been missing for following the rules. After wandering around for a while, they end up getting naughty together. The next day, Bernard learns John didn't come home. At a dinner party, he informs Henry of this, but instead of sending someone to look for John, Henry's glad the savage is gone and tells Bernard to go back to his old job. Bernard tries to entertain the guests with his own story from the Savage Lands, but he isn't a good storyteller. After the party, Wilhelmina explains to Bernard that the fad is over and people have moved on from savage stories. Sometime later, John finally comes back and Bernard calls him out for abandoning him. An argument ensues and soon the men come to blows. As they hit each other all over the place, Gary watches and his optic broadcasts the fight to the Banished and Wilhelmina. It turns out Bernard made him broadcast on purpose so he could make punching a fad again. From that on, John and Lenina start meeting to do the dirty in secret. One night, Lenina gives John back his music player and John tells her he loves her. Lenina says it back, but it's obvious she doesn't understand it. Later that day, Bernard asks John to come with him to a very important party. John doesn't want to go to any more parties, but Gary convinces him to give it a chance. John agrees but still refuses to wear the optic. Meanwhile in the tunnel, Mustafa wakes up after drowning and leaves to another secret area, where she enters an abandoned building belonging to Soma Pharmaceuticals. She activates the power and looks around the lab where her team started everything. A video plays their original sales speech as she stares at a picture of the team. Indra appears before her and announces that she solved her own algorithm by adapting and changing directives. While Mustafa looks at the new directive on a computer, she looks at a book where she finds something called the killing move. Apparently Indra believes that humankind is destined to find unhappiness no matter what and there's no such thing as a utopia, so happiness can only be achieved through death. In the evening, Bernard and John go to the party, where John is treated as strange and exotic. Wilhelmina drags John away to give him new clothes and senses a new emotion in him, but she can't recognize its love. Then the party host announces that they're doing a hunt, which means alphas get to chase after betas in the forest as a way to choose their dirty partner for the night. John hates it and tries to explain to Bernard how dates and love works, but he doesn't get it. As they wander around, John is shocked to see Lenina getting naughty with another guy. He runs to hide in the showers and keeps taking Soma to forget. Lenina finds him and they desperately cling to each other. Later at home, John asks Lenina to stop doing it with other partners. Lenina tries to explain she only does it to avoid suspicions, otherwise they could be separated. John has no choice but to accept it, however he asks her not tell him about it and not to do it in places where he is. The next day, Bernard calls Lenina to his office because he's noticed she's been taking her optic off at night. Remembering what John in the book from the hotel said, Bernard tries to ask Lenina out on a date. She agrees to play along and after work they go to watch the sunset. Bernard tries to kiss her, but Lenina turns him down and calls him a friend. Afterward they go to Bernard's place and Lenina agrees to do dirty with him. However Bernard can tell she's doing it out of obligation and kicks her out before having a breakdown. Meanwhile John feels frustrated because Lenina is out and goes to the Epsilon mess hall to drink. He bumps into Jack 60 and tells him he should choose an actual name for himself. The server refuses to give John any more alcohol and a furious John smashes a glass on the ground before giving a speech about how life is completely wrong in this city. As he walks out, Jack 60 smashes a glass too and all the other Epsilons start doing the same. Later that night, Henry goes to see Mustafa, who is losing her mind and keeps rambling about unstoppable death. John goes to see Wilhelmina and admits he wants to stop feeling, so Wilhelmina helps him get an optic on. She starts seeing John's childhood memories on the screen, which are full of emotion she never felt before. Wilhelmina tries to overwrite the memories so he can stop feeling awfully, but soon the death of the previous director is shown. Panicking, John runs away. He feels rather dizzy and is stumbling through the streets as broadcasted, so everyone laughs at him. When he's about to collapse, Bernard catches him and sees the director's fall. Later at home, Bernard interrogates Gary until he confesses John and Lenina's relationship. Meanwhile, Jack 60 approaches John, who makes him sit even though benches aren't for his rank. The other Epsilons stop working and gather to hear John complain about the system, learning more about how wrong it is. At the same time, Wilhelmina reviews the footage she took from John's memories and is so excited to feel all these new things that she ends up crying. At the office, Bernard asks Henry to vanish John. Suddenly Henry takes off his optic and asks Bernard to do the same, clearly looking nervous. He explains Mustafa is crazy and controls nothing. He also reveals he knows the previous director had arranged a flight near the cliff. Henry doesn't think the death was an accident and Bernard gets suspicious. In the meantime, Franny confronts Lenina, pointing out how strange she's been acting. Lenina swears she's fine and dodges her questions. After work, Franny visits Lenina and finds the book from the hotel, so she gets curious. At that same time John puts on optic to spy on Lenina. He sees her at a nightclub getting dirty with a guy and furiously takes the optic off again. After the party, Lenina is in the train and turns down several people's advances, saying only she must decide over her body. Back to Mustafa, she argues with Indra over another match of Go. Suddenly she adds a chess piece to their game, saying that Indra can't plan for a wild card like John. At the same time Bernard visits Wilhelmina and is surprised to see her in normal clothes and no wig. She tells him about the new emotions she's experienced and that John is the whole universe, refusing to take Soma. Furious, Bernard wrestles with Wilhelmina to steal the copy of the footage, accidentally throwing her to the ground. Then he watches the John's memories and confirms that the director was pushed. When Lenina goes home, John makes her share everything she did with the random man while he does the same things to her. However, he can't take it anymore and admits he spied on her, explaining real love must hurt. Frustrated, Lenina runs out of the apartment. Bernard brings the footage to Henry, who is going through an existential crisis, and tells him to deal with any problems. Soon the video of the director's death is playing all over London and is seen by Lenina, who rushes back to John's apartment. Instead, she finds Franny, who thinks Lenina needs reconditioning. Terrified, Lenina runs away again. As John walks through the streets, the locals send his location to Bernard. John tries hiding in a tunnel, where he's suddenly surrounded by Epsilons. Bernard shows up as well, but half of the Epsilons create a barrier between the men while the other half take John away. In the gardens, Henry notices the Epsilons aren't cleaning well. When he tries to call them out, they surround him and stab him to death with their cleaning tools. Sometime later, Mustafa makes Bernard the new director and he promises to stop John. Meanwhile, Franny hands herself in for reconditioning. At the hatchery, the other workers blame Lenina for Franny's decision, calling her a bad influence. Lenina explains how she's been living a better life, and when Bernard tries to call her to his office, she removes her optic and steps on it before leaving. Lenina goes to John's apartment and discovers Gary kept on cooking every day even tough John wasn't around. She grabs the music player and announces she's leaving New London. At the same time, Bernard checks on Franny's reconditioning and sees everything is fine. After he leaves, it's revealed Franny was given a tasing rod to go on a mission. At the Epsilon mess hall, Jack 60 asks John to be their leader. John throws a bowl of food as he tries to explain he doesn't know what to do. A nervous Epsilon takes Soma to deal with the situation and John gets furious, taking the dispenser from him as he announces that's the source of their issues. He tells them to choose between being happy or free, so the Epsilons start dropping all their dispensers. Then John tries to leave, but Jack 60 forces him to stay. In the meantime, Wilhelmina visits Mustafa to show her John's memories. It turns out some of Indra's files got mixed in the footage and Wilhelmina found Mustafa's memories as well. Wilhelmina thinks Mustafa used to be a mother, but Mustafa refuses to talk about it and kicks her out. As Indra stares at Mustafa, people in the hatchery are shocked to discover no more embryos are coming through. Lenina tries to leave the city, only to be surrounded by Franny and other co-workers who knock her out. Moments later, Gary brings the food to John and tells him Lenina's message. Desperate to go back to her, he agrees to help the Epsilons, and together they sneak into the Soma factory to destroy the whole supply. Soon the citizens begin having breakdowns all over town, not knowing how to deal with emotions. Some workers approach Bernard for an explanation, but he just tells them it'll get better soon. People start fighting over any Soma they may find around and a scared Bernard hides his own supply. When he looks out the window, he's shocked to see people have started to self-delete. Afterward, Jack and the Epsilons appear in town to look for Lenina. However, the Epsilons start randomly killing people, saying they're following John's example. John is unable to stop them and has to watch the massacre. Jack 60 finds Bernard, who starts explaining he's felt different since he touched the dead Epsilon. This makes Jack 60 decide not to kill him. Instead, he tells him to hide. The Epsilons find Franny's group and try to attack, so she defends herself with a taser. This distraction allows Lenina to run away. Franny goes after her but suddenly freezes, explaining this isn't really her and the reconditioning is forcing her. Now Lenina can escape again. After the talk with Bernard, Jack 60 tries to stop the other Epsilons, but they don't listen and the massacre continues. Soon Mustafa shows up and tells Jack 60 to come with her, taking him to the secret tunnel. Bernard bumps into John and they blame each other for everything. They also find Lenina and John tries to ask her to leave with him, but now Lenina believes John destroys everything he touches and is hesitant to accept. In the secret room, Jack 60 runs through a hologram of a forest while chasing after his dead friend. Mustafa explains it's not real and asks him to remove his optic. Jack 60 tries to do it with his fingers and fails, so instead he uses the object from the incident and cuts it out. Now he sees the room with the sleeping team and Mustafa explains their minds are connected to the system, which keeps it running. She asks Jack 60 for help and together they start shutting off the power in every bed. The city continues to go down under the attack of the Epsilons and things get worse when it loses power. Bernard is in his office and suddenly sees the same vision of a destroyed city that Mustafa saw. Then he finds himself in a red background and Indra appears, asking him to team up with her and showing him a vision of the rebels choosing him as the leader in the Savage Lands. At the same time, Jack 60 finds the bed with Elliot and after they touch each other, he decides to choke him to death. This causes all the Epsilons in the city to stop their attack. Moments later, Bernard wakes up near a cliff with a gold box next to him. Wilhelmina is there too and reveals she had the same vision as him, so they leave together in the ship left by the director. They make it to the Savage Lands to meet the rebels and Bernard shows the contents of the box to the leader, who agrees to team up with him. As they leave on a truck, a strange glow appears on Bernard's eyes. Afterward, Mustafa finds Lenina and makes her the new director. Meanwhile, John is connected to a simulation that makes him believe he's having a happy life with his love. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching. Okay.